This might have been the most hectic 2 months for Ole Miss under Pete Golding as he is beginning to coach. We'll talk to Walker Jones about how that all got navigated. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I'm your host, Stephen Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Now it's the number one sports podcast in America. That's because of fans like you taking in content like this, and we cannot tell you thank you enough. On today's show, we talk about Pete Golding's intro to the head coaching game at Ole Miss, and this Ole Miss team being potentially the most tampered with roster in the history of college football, and yet Ole Miss has become the face of it. We'll talk to Walker Jones about how the last 2 months have gone and how Ole Miss has came out ahead against all odds. All of this and more on today's Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Remember, we're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube, and a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make the show what it is, and that is your team every day. This episode is brought to you by Mazda. We put the same drive into every detail. Winning defines the moment. Putting in the work, that defines you. Stay tuned for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you. We're joined by Walker Jones. And Walker, it's interesting because I think this Ole Miss roster is potentially the most tampered with roster in the history of college football, but yet Ole Miss became the poster child for a couple of weeks for whatever narrative they were trying to spin.
Yeah, it's crazy timing, college athletics, really college football, as we have, found out. It's been a crazy 2 months, since really the Egg Bowl and the coaching change and playoff run, transfer portal being open. We were dealing with a lot. And, that's chaotic enough. This was kind of my fourth cycle going through it. And this one obviously was the most challenging for all those variables. You also had the first portal cycle where you had a house settlement, post-house settlement back in July that changed a lot of the rules and regulations. And that added a level of complexity that we hadn't had to deal with in the past. So for all those reasons, it was really challenging. Extremely proud of where we sit here today with the type of roster that we have. I think it's a top 10 roster. And we were able to, retain a large majority of our core roster that obviously was very popular to some other coaches. And keep those guys here in Oxford, and then, did a great job in the transfer portal, attracting some top talent and addressing some needs from a graduation standpoint that we knew we were going to have. And that's always kind of been the formula, is really start with the retention piece first, and then roll into the portal to fill the needs that you lose, with graduation or other kids, leaving the program. So, it was a fascinating time, equally exciting and exhilarating and frustrating, probably. But again, that's just kind of the model we're in now, and we have to make the best of it. And from Coach Golding down through the staff, our personnel department, and then everybody else that played a role in this, I'm very, very proud of.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting to see, in my opinion. Ole Miss kind of thrived throughout this whole process with as much going on. And you mentioned something earlier, that this was the first house settlement transfer portal window that popped open. What were the differences that you noticed in this window in negotiating, and things that were questions that had to be asked? And what did you assume was going to be a bigger deal than it kind of was?
I think it was several things. I think the revenue share, there were a lot of questions on just how the university revenue share works, the contractual language that comes from a state institution like ours that's, for the first time ever, compensating athletes. And so I think that was new for everybody. I think it was new for our university, just like the other schools. Also new for the athletes and the families and the agents, for the first time contracting with a university. In previous years, it was contracting with a third party like the Grove Collective, which obviously now is still a part of it, but it's just one part of it. And so I think the challenges around really the unknown of how the contractual language would differ between a university rev share contract and an NIL third party agreement, and the requirement to submit those to the CSC and NIL Go to be cleared and approved, how that process would work, the rules that you had to work within. I thought that agents and the players, would probably, we'd see a little bit of a reduction on the NIL side, but we really haven't to this point. There's still a healthy desire for NIL compensation, third party compensation to a much higher level than I think anybody anticipated, which I know was not the goal of the House settlement. The House settlement really was put in place to limit compensation to that revenue share and that cap. That did not happen. We still saw escalating values and again, a real healthy appetite for supplemental NIL on top of the rev share. And so we had to adjust to that. And I think agents played a much more involved role in the negotiating of these agreements than in previous years. We've seen agents be involved, but I think this cycle was the first time where I think literally almost every player we dealt with had an agent, and those agents were much more involved in the total process, just given the complexity of having basically two buckets of money.
And does that change the way that you come up? You mentioned this is 4 years you've gone through it with every player having an agent. Does it change the way that you kind of broach everything, or do they come to you essentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it didn't change a lot in the fact of agents reaching out to us, and then in other ways it probably was new on how involved they were in the visits and the schools that each player was talking to. In years past, really the agents were just there to make sure the kids didn't get taken advantage of contractually. They kind of left the recruiting and the football stuff to the player and the family. This year, the agents were much more involved in all aspects. Both the football side, where these players were looking to visit and to consider, and also the contractual side of it. So much more complicated, dealing with multiple agencies, multiple agents sometimes on one player, having to negotiate multiple sets of language when you're talking about supplemental NIL versus university rev share, and just the ability to tie those things together from a communication standpoint so the athletes didn't get confused. So, yeah, I think it was a learning experience for all of us, the agents and for collectives and for the university, probably more so than anybody, because it was the first time they've really been pulled into this world. That's where I think we did a pretty admirable job in working directly with the university, with obviously with Keith Carter and Matt McLaughlin and our university infrastructure, both from a compliance standpoint, from a legal standpoint, from a cap standpoint, and then from a NIL collective standpoint. We were really aligned, and the communication was exhausting because it had to be. But at the end of the day, I think it shows that we did a pretty good job of it.
All right. When we come back, we will talk to Walker about those first few weeks after the transition and what actually went on and what was happening there. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. This is Mazda's Moving the Game Forward. For those of you who know, there's more to the score than what is on the screen. AJ Storr moving to a sixth man for Ole Miss men's basketball right now has kind of unlocked this player and his potential. He is becoming the unquestioned star of this basketball team. And there might be disappointing results from time to time, but it's not because of what AJ Storr is doing right now. These remind us of exactly what it takes to raise the bar. It's the extra work off the court, dialing in every detail, giving that extra fire and that grit and that I never quit. We put that same passion into every model at Mazda. Highlights that make the real. What it took to get there makes it count. There is more to a Mazda because there's more to you. If you're interested in buying a Mazda, hook them up. Find your local Mazda dealer and they'll be able to help you out. Do us a favor, like, subscribe, and comment on this video. Subscribe to the podcast on whichever audio podcast you're listening to and give a 5-star review. It costs absolutely nothing, but keeps all of this free. And thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network in America. You already live your team every day. Now take it up a level and go ad free. Join the Everydayer Club and get Locked On Ole Miss with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more. All for just $5 per month or $50 per year. Go to lockedonolemiss.supercast.com or check out the link down in the show notes to learn more. All right, Walker, let's go back in time a little bit to the first part of December, and it was chaotic. It was one of the most chaotic times that I can remember. The only other time that was this chaotic was the immediate aftermath of Tommy Tuberville doing the same thing 25 years ago. I want to know what you and Matt McLaughlin, how you had to hold this together, because y'all obviously did, because Ole Miss had a very successful retention effort and transfer portal, which meant work had to be done. What was the immediacy after that change?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Stephen. And, these were kind of first of a kind situations, a coach leaving a playoff team in the middle of a playoff run with National Signing Day occurring the next week, looming portal window opening, a playoff run, a change at head coach, a split staff, half the staff staying, half the staff going, but still helping the coach. It was a lot to process. And again, there was really no blueprint to follow. And we just basically just moved into the Manning Center and tried to triage everything. The first thing was really, there was no personnel department. The majority of the personnel department had left with our former coach. Good news is that we were involved in the personnel plan all year. So it wasn't a start from scratch type situation. We had contingency plans if this were to happen in terms of details and compensation and a plan of whether our former coach was going to stay or go. And so Matt and I, along with several others, just really kind of moved into the personnel wing of the Manning Center and started shoring up any of the loose ends. And that was first and foremost talking to our players, talking to our current team, letting them know that we had a plan for them, that we wanted them to focus on making a run in this playoff and focus on playing great football, but at the same time that we had a compensation plan for them as well. And again, a lot of that work had been done prior to all this happening, so we weren't caught, with our hands tied. We were prepared, and we just made a list of the players that we needed to speak to immediately. And it was a player-focused plan. And we spent days and nights just calling the players in, visiting with them, talking to their agents, talking to their family. Because we knew retention had to be a focus. And we had a lot of positivity, in the building, but there was also a lot of unknown. And so we wanted the players to know that we had a plan for them. And I think judging by the ability for us to retain the majority of our roster, it worked well. We moved quick to retain that core group of our roster. And also, too, at the same time, we had National Signing Day. And we were trying to communicate to our incoming signees, who a lot of them are mid-year, who are showing up in January, about what their situation was going to look like. So it wasn't just our current roster. It was also trying to have a top 20 signing class, which we ended up having with the change with the coaching change. So again, just a lot of credit to a lot of different people, starting with, Coach Golding and the staff. And then, Matt McLaughlin, myself, Keith, all the others that jumped in, Javon Patterson and our legal team, our compliance team, Taylor Hall and his team. Everybody was just kind of all hands on deck. And, there were some sleepless nights. I had many nights where I didn't leave the building, myself and others, and we worked around the clock 24 hours. It was exhausting, but that's what it took.
Yeah. What do you think, besides all the hard work, because obviously there was a ton of hard work, but when you look at 31 players went from Iowa State to Penn State when Matt Campbell left, and all of these coaches move over, almost lost 4 players to LSU. That's it. What do you think the secret sauce was there?
Again, I think a lot about what I just said. I think we had a plan for them. We made them feel wanted. We made them, we were able to clear some of the uneasiness and some of the confusion from the building. So I think that played a huge role in it. I think our players are mature enough to be able to look at 2 situations and determine which one was probably better for them based off the experience. And I think a lot of our players felt like Ole Miss and Oxford is home for them. They see that we could win at a very high level, given the playoff run that we've had. And so I just think that's when you have great culture in your locker room. We always talk about football being such a team sport, and these are the times when that culture gets called upon. And if you don't have great culture and great young men that are very mature in that locker room, then the fracture occurs, and you start seeing the exodus out the door and people jumping for greener grass. And our players just never felt that way. They felt like that there was a plan for them here. They were able to look at, the opportunities out there and weigh them against what they had here. And again, it just speaks to a lot of hard work and a lot of great culture in that Manning Center that helped us protect the roster.
Yeah, and we talk about protecting and all of that. And one of the things I wanted to get to is there's a chance at the start of the 2026 season where Ole Miss has the best player in college football in 3 of the most important positions on the field. If Trinidad Chambliss gets his waiver, obviously you have Kewan Lacy, and let's not forget Lucas Carneiro, the kicker that completely went nuts in the playoffs, just breaking records all over the place. What is it like for somebody that survived one of the great probations in history at Ole Miss in the 90s, seeing Ole Miss with a roster that stacked?
Yeah, look, I think it speaks to, Stephen, for those of us like you and I and others that have been around Ole Miss football for a long time, we have some historical context to be able to add to that question. And, I think, we always wanted to believe that our program was built to last and it had a level of consistency. That hadn't always been the case. We kind of rode the ebbs and flows of having a couple big seasons and then a huge drop off. And there was never able to be kind of just that steady growth and steady march towards championships. And I think that's what we wanted to believe a lot of times. I feel like now that's where we are, that we are built to last because of the program and the infrastructure, the resources, the way our fans have gravitated to this new world of NIL and transfer portal, the way our administration, our chancellor, our AD, and others have bought into the uniqueness of the college football model now. The ability for us to stomach chaos, like we've talked about. I mean, we've been at ground zero of chaos the last, 3 months. And so, and I think you have to be comfortable in that type of setting, and we are. And so I just feel like we're built to last. And again, when you have great players in your locker room, that attract other great players, then the ability to retain them is your primary focus. And that's not always about money. Money is a big part of it. Obviously, compensation is a big part of it. But I think, people are willing to pay these guys at other schools too. What really separates it is the culture and the resources, the fan base, and that love for the city of Oxford, the university, that our people put around these players, and I think they sense that. And so, yeah, it feels great to know that we have a chance to have just as good, if not better, of a roster than we had this year, to be in the national conversation as a contender, which probably hasn't always been the case.
Should be really interesting to see. Anyway, in our final segment, when we come back, we will talk to Walker about Pete Golding and get his ideas on recruiting and the transfer portal and all that moving forward now that the dust has settled. We'll talk about that right after this. Hiring isn't just about finding somebody willing to take a job. It's about finding the right person with the right background who can actually help your business move forward. And if you want candidates to match what you're looking for, Indeed sponsored jobs is the move. Because instead of hoping the right person stumbles across your post, Indeed helps you match with quality candidates by boosting your job listing to the people who fit your specific criteria, like skills, certifications, and location. If I was hiring, I wouldn't just want somebody who can help. I'd want somebody with real experience who can jump right in and make an impact. That's what I like about Indeed. You get specific and targeted exactly what you need for your business notifications. It saves time because you're spending less energy sorting through mismatches, and with sponsored jobs, your post gets seen by candidates who actually are a fit. Here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners to this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. One thing that's interesting, Walker, Pete Golding, over the course of 2 months, I cannot think of one misstep that he made. And he was not the name that was rumored around whenever all of this was being talked about in November before it actually happened. But Pete took the job, grabbed it by the scruff of the neck, and just in over 2 months made himself a little bit of a folk hero in Oxford.
Yeah, Pete is, to be around Pete, you find out real fast just the energy, relentless energy he has, the relentless focus on talent and, how to not only acquire talent, but also how to develop it as well. And, Keith and the Chancellor, I think, did a phenomenal job of recognizing, who would be the person that could stabilize the locker room and the coaching staff in a very short amount of time, given all the things that we were dealing with. And so, I think that's ultimately why, he was the choice. And I agree with that choice because we needed somebody to, again, stabilize the chaos in the Manning Center, in and around the program, not only with our players, but with our coaching staff. And we also needed somebody that would have that sort of kind of relentless energy and chip on his shoulder in dealing with all the unknown and adversity that we were going to have to deal with. And, Pete's a fighter. He's a defensive minded guy, see ball, get ball. And, obviously as a former defensive guy, I love that about him. But again, I think he's done a great job of not only, retaining and building the roster, but also building his coaching staff. at the same time. And, that was so, over the last 6 weeks, that was one of the things that's probably the most important, was the ability to multitask and do multiple things at the same time. Try to focus on winning a national championship and preparing a team while also managing a staff, a hybrid staff, so to speak, thinking about the full staff, and then also getting ready for the recruitment and retention piece of it. So give Coach a ton of credit. I love working with him. Love his infectious energy, the way he cares for these players. And, just look forward to watching him grow as a head coach every day that he's in that chair.
So what do you think now that the dust is settled, what will next year look like when he's had a year to go through this? Will it be more high school centric? Will it look a lot like this year in the transfer portal? What is your guess there?
Well, I think some of that will be up to Pete. I think some will be up to the marketplace. Given what we saw this portal season and how the model is working, I can't see this current model sustaining itself long term. So I do think there's going to have to be some monumental change post-house settlement, or otherwise I just don't know if the system can keep up. So I think I say that to say that I think some of that will be dictated by ongoing legislation and the evolving world of the rules and regulations that'll come with either the NCAA, the Power Four conferences, Congress, maybe to some extent. And so I think that will dictate a lot about how we act. There's no spring portal window this year. That was another factor that was different. There used to be 2 portal windows. Now there's only 1. So it's literally be a full year before we're back into this situation again. And I'm curious to see what changes happen to the model that will force us to probably make some, adaptations to how we've retained and recruited the roster. But I think Pete would tell you, besides all that, I think he'll be able to be a lot more focused on the things that matter at that time and not all the factors that we had to deal with in this cycle. Hopefully we're in the middle of a playoff run again. Hopefully the portal window maybe will move until after the playoffs are over and we get it into the spring where it should be. So you can really just focus on trying to win a championship and not have to focus on retaining your roster and recruiting your roster while you're trying to win a championship. So I'm hoping that change at the very minimum takes place, that the portal cycle is later, so we don't have to deal with that. So, but I think he'll learn just like we all will. And I think that's the one thing I've learned, and others that have been in this since the beginning, is yes, you can provide some historical context, but you also have to be willing to kind of rethink the model and adapt or die, or you're going to get left behind.
And today was supposed to be the closing of the drop ad date at Ole Miss. Now, because of the horrible storm that went through Oxford, Mississippi, it's at least February 15th. Does that mean that business is still open?
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, I think we've pretty much answered all our questions and needs. Doesn't mean something couldn't happen late. But it just, we're one of the schools that comes back to school later than others. So we're already, on the back end of this thing anyway. Most other schools have been in for a month, unlike us. So we've got some catch up on classwork to do for sure. And again, there could be something that happens late, but I feel pretty good where we are. If we don't have to, if we don't have another player come our way, I think we're pretty solid where we are.
All right, Walker Jones from the Grove Collective, thank you so much for stopping by this morning, and let's do it again soon, man.
Always great talking to you, Stephen. Appreciate you, man, and I look forward to talking again soon, buddy.
All right, take care. All right, thanks for tuning in today to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. We're going to continue to talk about the transfer portal all during this break. We're going to start talking baseball. We're going to talk basketball from time to time. Be sure to subscribe and follow the show so you can get all of the episodes. We're on all the social channels, so check those out as well. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. The Locked On Ole Miss ad-free plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to LockedOnOleMiss.supercast.com to join the club. For those of you on video, we're going to send you to the first ever 24/7 National Locked On YouTube channel. On audio, make sure you check out a second listen. We're partying and moving along, and I hope everybody has a good time. And if you're in Oxford, please be safe. And, we're all thinking about you still. So thank you. Hotty toddy.